Over the course of the last 1 million years, hominid brain evolution has followed a distinct slow, fast, stop trajectory. This timeline tracks the sudden vertical spike in mental ability that occurred during our evolution, followed by an abrupt plateau into contemporary equilibrium. Brain tissue is metabolically expensive to maintain, and expanding the skull introduces severe biological penalties. Increasing cranial capacity leads to significant childbirth hazards and prolonged infant helplessness, as the brain must do a larger portion of its development outside the womb. Standard evolutionary models struggle to explain how hominids survived these extreme metabolic and reproductive costs to grow such large brains in such a short window of time. The evolutionary puzzle begins here, with Australopithecus, before the onset of rapid expansion. These primitive stone tools mark the beginning of our ancestors' ecological adaptation. Basic tool use required slightly larger brains to process simple coordination and data storage tasks, providing a baseline advantage in survival. While these ecological needs explain the initial slow growth of the brain, the computational requirements for basic stoneworking are insufficient to drive the vertical growth spike seen later in our history. The most common explanation for this growth is the ecological adaptation hypothesis, which suggests that tool use created a positive feedback loop for higher intelligence. This chart graphs the net ecological fitness benefits against increasing brain size. The parabolic curve shows benefits increasing initially as mental ability improves. As the brain continues to grow, the metabolic and reproductive costs begin to outweigh the ecological returns. This causes the fitness curve to plummet toward point X star. Evolution reaches an equilibrium at this point, where the survival costs of a larger brain equal the ecological benefits of being smarter. This equilibrium point depends on the environment. In a harsh landscape like Alaska, the ecological selection pressures for intelligence are high. Contrast this with the Australian outback, where the specific tool and foraging requirements for survival are entirely different. If the environment alone were the driver, human intelligence would vary significantly across these different geographies. The fact that baseline intelligence remains uniform across the globe indicates the ecological model is incomplete. The intraspecific competition hypothesis suggests a different driver. Hominids used their brains primarily to outmaneuver and outwit each other within their own social groups. This social competition follows the logic of the hawk-dove game. In this matrix, a hawk strategist uses aggression to take resources, but risks serious physical injury if their opponent also plays hawk. Handheld weapons introduced a new variable to this social game. Weapons equalized physical differences, allowing an individual to play an aggressive hawk strategy with a significantly reduced risk of injury. With physical strength neutralized, survival began to depend entirely on strategic facility, the ability to invent new tactics and form alliances. This shift initiated a mental arms race. Applying the math of an evolutionarily stable strategy, or ESS, reveals a significant flaw in using social competition as the sole driver for our brain size. This probability density curve shows how individuals invest in a trait during an evolutionary game auction. The mathematical equilibrium of such an auction dictates that the majority of the population will make virtually no investment in the contested trait. A pure mental arms race would leave most of the species with base-level ape-like brains. It cannot account for the high baseline intelligence found across the entire modern human population. The mental arms race amplifier synthesizes these two theories. Ecological adaptation raises the floor of intelligence, while social competition drives the vertical growth spikes. This chart from Figure 2 shows a fitness curve where ecological benefits remain near zero for a broad interval of brain size values between x1 and x2. When the curve sits at zero, benefits equal metabolic costs. Here, the mental arms race becomes cost-free. Figure 3 illustrates superamplification, where the fitness curve crisscrosses the zero axis several times. The arms race exploits these specific zero-cost intervals, accelerating brain expansion across the population without the usual ecological penalties. This amplifier model explains why human intelligence skyrocketed uniformly. Because the armament costs of our social strategies went largely unpaid, intelligence could expand across geographical and ecological boundaries. Navigating these two overlapping evolutionary games results in a specific slow, fast stop pattern of growth. Phase 1 began as ecological adaptation through tool use raised the functional minimum baseline of hominid intelligence. Phase 2 is the vertical spike triggered by the introduction of weapons, which initiated the amplified mental arms race during zero-cost ecological intervals. Phase 3 is the contemporary plateau, where biological costs eventually outpaced the strategic utility of the arms race. The slow, fast stop pattern reflects a species reaching a polymorphic equilibrium between these two competing evolutionary pressures. Ecological factors alone cannot account for the full scale of human cognitive development. Foraging and toolmaking were only the starting point. Our cognitive development was driven by a compounding arms race of social strategy. Once weapons neutralized physical strength, survival favored those who could best navigate complex social games. Modern human intelligence is the result of our ancestors exploiting the narrow mathematical margins of evolutionary game theory.